Plants vs. Zombies, a series of games that if you were around during the earlier days of mobile games, before the 99% of people can't get past level 5, as were around, then you probably played one of them. And while those are great games, I'm not talking about them today. Today, I'm talking about probably the most hated game in the series up to this point. Because it gets a lot of hate, and while quite a bit of it is warranted, I think there's a little bit of things, that this game does well, and it's not given credit for, simply because people look at it as a bad game. So today, I'm going to talk about Plants vs. Zombies, Battle for Neighborville. So to start things off, I'm going to talk about what the game is. I would assume that most people watching this have a pretty good understanding of what the game is and how it's played, but if you don't, then I'll do a quick rundown. Plants vs. Zombies Battle for Neighborville is a hero shooter. Think Overwatch, but it has plants and zombies, of course. With multiple modes ranging from vanquishing enough plants or zombies until one team reaches 50 vanquishes, to defending a graveyard or a garden, depending on if you're a plant or a zombie, from waves of enemies, and it all centers in one place called Neighborville. I know, that was a pretty big surprise. Now, if you still don't understand the game, then either go watch some gameplays of it or play the game for yourself. Now, on to the gameplay. The gameplay for Battle for Neighborville is similar, but not quite the same as the two games that came before it. The whole game is kind of like that in a way. You have your standard run, jump, and shoot, as you would expect, but then they add some new things for this game. One of the new things they added is the ability to sprint. I play Battle for Neighborville more than either of the Garden Warfare games for two reasons, and one of those reasons is the sprinting. It's such a small change, but it makes me feel so fast, and some of the sprinting animations are pretty cool looking. Another thing they added, which doesn't change up the game nearly as much for me at least, are emotes. Emotes and other forms of communication, that is. They're fun, and the talking ones are helpful if you need to tell a teammate something, but I rarely ever use them unless I'm doing that. Now, all of those things are fine and dandy, but what makes the game truly fun for me are the character abilities. Each character has 3 abilities. They can range from healing your teammates, to throwing a butter beacon that reveals where all the enemies in a vicinity are, to forming a space station with 4 other people. These abilities are what keep me invested. It's always fun for me to figure out what our team needs help doing, switching to a character that would best help the situation, and trying my best to help. Speaking of characters, that's probably the most controversial part of this game. To understand this, you have to look at the games that came before Battle for Neighborville, the Garden Warfare games. While seemingly having less characters than Battle for Neighborville on the surface, they had something called variants. Variants were tweaked versions of the main characters that, while seemingly having little tweaks and changes, could completely change the gameplay of the character drastically, making for some very unique types of characters with gameplays that you wouldn't see in any other games in the shooter genre. It added a huge amount of uniqueness to the Garden Warfare games. And Battle for Neighborville completely removed it. This was a huge upset for mostly all of the Plants vs. Zombies fan base. And still, to this day, there's no real explanation as to why they removed the variants at all. If I had to guess, I would say either there was a lack of time to add them, or they just wanted to simplify the game and they thought that by removing the variants it would make it seem more approachable. While it may have helped the approachability a little bit, it was definitely not worth the backlash that it caused. It seems that they saw the amount of backlash they got for it and tried to compensate by releasing the legendary upgrades that changed the character's playstyle considerably. And while I like the idea, there was only a few ever released, and there wasn't enough change to not choose it over the original. Anyways, I've sat here and complained about the lack of variants, so let's just see if the characters in general will make up for their exclusion. They won't. I like the characters, but they won't. Let's still look at them though. We're we're going to start off with the plant side, with a classic, specifically the pea shooter. Now, to be honest, I don't play as the pea shooter much, but when I see other people play as him, or when I play against him, he seems to be pretty good. Sometimes a little too good. He's pretty small and agile, so it can be pretty hard to hit him sometimes, and his chili bean bomb is a one-shot for most, if not all, of the zombies. Next is Chomper. Chomper is a very powerful attack, but in order to use it, you have to get up close and personal with the zombies, which can be a bit of an issue. He does have a range attack, but it's slow, and it does good damage, but I have a hard time actually hitting people with it. That could just be a me problem, though. I'm not the best shot in the world. His burrow ability allows him to go underground for a short time, making him invincible, and he can also one-shot any zombie in this mode other than an imp, or a space cadet in a space station. Next is Colonel Corn. When he was first introduced into Garden Warfare 2, he was seen as a bit overpowered, but in this game, a lot of people tend to think he's bottom of the barrel in a way. But I really like enjoying playing as him. He's a great character for pushing an enemy, and while his abilities are a bit on the weaker side, I still think he does a pretty good job. Now it's time for our first new character in Battle for Neighborville, Nightcap. When the game first released, Nightcap was so overpowered that she could take down pretty much any zombie with ease, and they couldn't even stand a chance against her. And while she's been thankfully nerfed a lot since then, she's still a very solid plant to play as. She has the ability to turn invisible for a short amount of time and can ambush a group of zombies while doing this. It makes her a really annoying plant to fight, but a really fun one to play as too. Another new character introduced in this game is Snapdragon. I also don't play as Snapdragon very much. I don't know if it's me or what, but I have a hard time trying to figure out how to play as him sometimes. I really enjoy his attack though. You don't need to have perfect aim to hit people, and his blazing trail ability is great defensive mode to stop zombies. Most of the time, that is. After Snapdragon comes Cactus. Cactus is the dedicated sniper for the plants. When I play as her, I mostly use the drone and try to place potato mines in strategic places, and most of the time it works out. I think she makes a great sniper and attack character sometimes too. Next is Citron. I think out of all the characters brought back, his made the most changes, and I don't think all of them are for the best. First of all, he's pretty ugly. I thought he was ugly in Garden Warfare 2, but I think he's uglier here for sure. Now on to his actual gameplay. He's a pretty standard tank type of character. He has a lot of ammo, some attack-centric abilities, and a shield. While he may not be the most favorite character for me, I do think he plays a pretty vital role in the overall scope of the game. The next is the plant's answer to the imp, Oak and Acorn. I love playing as Oak and Acorn. Fighting against them is a different story though. When you spawn in, you have to play as Acorn, called Acorn. And the character is very small, who would have guessed, and has a lot of mobility since he's pretty weak. But he has the ability to yodel, which calls in a huge tree that'll pick him up and acts as the plant's version of the Z-Mech. He's slow, but very powerful, and he can wipe out zombies pretty easily. But he's pretty vulnerable since he's so big as well as slow. Now, on to the first character in support class, Sunflower. Sunflower is the model support character. I haven't played much of her either. It's a weird combination of abilities for me. I think if they replace the ability where she throws out the sunlight with pretty much anything else, I'd like her more. And finally, the last character on the plant side, because I'm not talking about the swarm characters or wizard because I refuse to spend my coins or rainbow stars on them, is Rose. Rose is a character who is a support character, but I think most people play her as an attack character. She has the ability to turn zombies into goats, which is pretty unique of an ability, and it's really satisfying to pull off on big groups of zombies. She also has the ability Arcane Enigma, which turns her invincible and speeds up all the plants around her, but most people, including me, use it as a way to slip away from a fight when you're almost dead. And with that, I finally covered all of the plants. Now onto the zombies. powerful in the zombies, is a classic, Foot Soldier. He's a very good character to play as if you're new to the game. He's a very basic abilities, and while that may seem unappealing, I think it makes him feel like a very satisfying character to play as. He's not the best, but he's a pretty solid choice overall. Next is the Imp. While the Imp in his normal form is very small and pretty weak, unlike the other small characters, he doesn't have an ability that really helps him get out of a tough situation. He's more combat oriented in his small form. But he can call upon his Z-Mech and it will fall from the sky and pick him up, and then he becomes even stronger. The mech has a very long cooldown before and after you can use it though, which does make it a bit worse than all the others. It also has a time limit while using it, but unlike Oak, it has the ability to sprint, so that's something. Now is Super Brains. He's pretty much the zombie's version of the Chomper, but he has a bit more direct attacking moves. While most of Chomper's abilities centered around trapping a zombie, Super Brains is more reliant on rushing a plant and hoping it works. Since there's a more direct approach, he's also equipped with a shield, which I have to be honest, when I'm in the heat of battle, I forget it exists. That's not the game's fault though, that's just because I'm stupid. After Super Brains is 80s Action Hero. While I don't play him much, I respect the direction they took with him, with a more risk and reward type of primary attack with the charging bow. His rocket ride ability is also a great ability with handling a lot of plants at once, and it feels fair since it makes you really vulnerable while using it. After 80s Action Hero is a character that I see a lot of people hating on, Electric Slide. Now ever since day one, I've always been a big fan of Electric Slide. I'll admit that at first, it was just the character design that I liked, but after playing as her for a while, I started to really like her. She's not the strongest character, but she's great for crowd control. The Funky Bouncer and Disco Tornado can clear a room fast. Putting them at a bottleneck point can be a huge help. Now it's time for Captain Deadbeard. I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this, but I like this version of Captain Deadbeard. I like his ability to be a sniper and use the anchor for high ground, but he can also use his scatter shot and use the anchor as a way to get away from his attackers. I use him way more than I did in Garden Warfare 2, and I'm only a little ashamed to say it. On to All-Star. I've never been a big All-Star player, so I can't speak on him too much, but I think he makes for a great defensive player. His dummy shield can come in handy when you need to find a place to heal real quick, and his imp punt ability is pretty powerful too, kinda like the Chili Bean. After the All-Star is Space Cadet. Now, I really want to like Space Cadet, but I just can't. Every time I play as her, I just feel like she's too weak, and even when she goes into her space station, it's just not enough for me. But I really like the concept of the character. It's super unique and fun. While her abilities don't do it for me, I know the game isn't supported anymore, but I think she could still use a buff. Maybe I'm just no good as her, who knows? Well, you probably do. After Space Cadet is the zombies version of the Sunflower, the Scientist. I like the Scientist considerably more than the Sunflower. He's made to heal zombies as well as getting in the fight with his primary attack. I like him so much because of his warp ability. It makes it really easy to get in and out of a fight, and it also makes it really easy to get to your teammates faster to heal them or even revive them. And the final character is the Engineer. The Engineer is a character that's really hard to get a hang of. He takes a lot of skill, and I've not reached that point. I love the ability of the bouncing projectiles, and that his turret buffs everyone around it. He's a support character that Rose should have been. Now with all the characters being covered, let's talk about the looks of the characters and everything else. Now for this entry in the Plants vs. Zombies games, they went for a more cartoony art style as opposed to the Garden Warfare's more gritty and dark art style. I assume it was another attempt at making the game more approachable, accessible. And for the characters, I'm not sure if it worked. I like that they wanted to change up the style a bit, but the characters don't look too good after it. Now most of them are fine, they just look a little undercooked. And then there's Citron and the Imp. These two just look really bad to me. It may just be my eyes, but I just don't like the way they look. Everyone else is passable, but these two... And all the teeth on the zombies also look pretty weird. They're like, just weird squares shoved in a mouth. Now one thing I hear a lot of criticisms about is the environments. A lot of people do not like the realistic looking environments with the contrast of the cartoony characters. And while I can see where this is coming from, it makes sense. I really like the environments. It's the second thing that really keeps me coming back to this game over both of the Garden Warfare games. I think that everything looks so pretty. Like whenever you just spawn into Giddy Park, it looks so gorgeous, and it's just amazing they were able to make this game look so gorgeous. Now, onto the actual meat of the game modes. In Battle for Neighborville, there's a single player and a multiplayer. But before you can worry about that, when you start the game, you'll be booted into an online server called Giddy Park. Giddy Park functions kind of like a main menu, but with other players. It's a really cool concept to me. There's your spawn area, where you can do a number of things, from choosing what multiplayer game mode to play, to buying items from Rucks, to playing a musical minigame. And once you leave the spawn area, you get boosted into a little park area. This area is just for playing around before you want to play an actual game, or anything like that. It works kind of like the backyard battleground, but you can't cause nearly as much chaos, which is a pretty big downside. There's not much reason to go down to the actual park than to do a little fighting or collect the occasional chest. But Giddy Park is where you choose which game mode you like to play. There's both a single player and a multiplayer mode, as I just stated. Initially, I was blown away that there was a single player, but after I played a little bit of it, I realized that it was mostly just getting a bunch of collectibles, and in every single one you would do pretty much the same tasks, and you'd have a boss fight. But the boss fight was definitely the highlight of each single player campaign. They were all unique, and most of them were pretty good. I can't speak on how replayable they are, because I've not replayed them, but I've heard that after the first time they get pretty boring. So the single player is a bit underwhelming, but to be fair, single player has never been the series' strong point. But then again, all they really needed to make Battle for Neighborville better than Garden Warfare 2 was to add a good single player. But I digress. These games were always more about the multiplayer, so how is it? It's good. The maps can be a bit boring and sometimes don't feel too well optimized for the situations, but overall it's what I expected. It consists of Turf Takeover, a push the payload type of game mode where one team pushes the payload and the other tries to stop them, or they just capture points until they sabotage the other team, or until the timer runs out. Out of all the game modes, it's my personal favorite, but it can be pretty unfair, because if there's one really good person on the other team, it can really make or break the whole game. Then there's Team Vanquish. It's a simple game mode where the first team to get 50 vanquishes wins. Those are the only two game modes that I remember that are always in rotation, but the weekly event can spice up the variation of game modes. A favorite a lot of people play is the Battle Arena. It's a 4v4 game mode where you fight to the last one standing, and after each round you have to choose a new character. You can't play as the same character twice. It makes the players play a character they usually wouldn't play as, which makes for a really great game mode. And the final game mode is Garden/Graveyard Ops. This is a game mode where you would either defend a garden or graveyard, depending on if you're a zombie or plant, from waves of enemies. This is another part of the game they really messed up. It was the original basis for the whole shooter series and harkened back to the original Plants vs. Zombies game, and it was gameplay defending a garden. But in this game, they made it so unbelievably easy. It would have been so easy to just make a difficulty selector, but instead it's set at one difficulty, and that's all the multiplayer modes. 3 permanent modes, and 1 alternating mode. I'm not one to complain too much, but there could have been a bit more variation. But that's what we have. So do I think the hate for this game is deserved? Kinda. It's not a bad game, but it's not a great game. It's worse than both of the other shooter games in the Plants vs. Zombies franchise. But in the game's defense, it was supposed to be a live service game, so maybe they intended to add more characters, and they were going to add variants and new maps and new game modes, but they didn't get to because not enough people played it, and so they just shut it down really quickly. It's kind of sad how this game could have been amazing, but just a few really bad decisions made for a bad reaction which caused the game to fail. And after its failure, PopCap, well, maybe they'll see it as a sign that people don't want any more Plants vs. Zombies shooters, which is upsetting, because it's not that people don't want one, they just want a better one. And I can't blame them too much, because this was not the game that everyone wanted, but I think it's its own thing, and it deserves at least a little bit more love from the community. And if more people play it, then maybe they'll bring it back, and they'll make a new Plants vs. Zombies shooter game. Maybe Garden Warfare 3. Who knows? I still play Battle for Neighborville. That's all that really matters to me.